Welcome to the Good Growing Podcast. I am Chris Enroth, horticulture educator with University of Illinois Extension, coming at you from Macomb, Illinois, and we have got a great show for you today. We are going to be talking with Brodie, Dunn, and Timo Wayman all about bee hotels, pollinator hotels, insect hotels. I don't know. I'm going to be surrounded by bug people today, and you know I'm not doing this by myself. I am joined, as always, every single week by horticulture educator Ken Johnson in Jacksonville. Hey, Ken.
Hello, Chris. It's going to be a good day. We're talking bugs.
I know you're excited. You love this stuff. You have chipped away at my exterior to insects, trying to keep them out of my home, out of my garden, all of that stuff. And now, to my wife's chagrin, like there's an insect that crawls across our dining room table, and she's like, "Do something." I'm like, "It's fine. Don't worry about it." And she's you've ruined me, Ken. Thank you for all these years of bug talk.
Remember, if you're cold, they're cold. Bring them inside.
that does not count when there's brown marmorated stink bug crawling all over my kitchen. So those guys get flicked back outside.
Well, we'll give you a pass on that one.
Yeah, thank you.
They're not supposed to be here.
Exactly. Yeah. So, well, I mean, with that, Ken, there's we're going to be talking about bee hotels today. Curious, have you ever put up a bee hotel in your yard?
I have one. I have not put it up yet. Just one of those things. I think about it and then never do it. So maybe this year will be the year.
I'm in the same boat. Yeah, I'm same way. We got a bee hotel for Christmas a few years ago. I'm like, this is so pretty. I don't want to put it outside. So it's, I really like it. Actually, it's not necessarily a bee hotel. It's just like there's the blur it's going. It's like an insect overwintering thing that you're supposed to put all these things in here and just set it outside and let them overwinter in it. And I guess for people listening, I'm holding like a little wooden box with some pine cones, some moss, and some reeds, like little sticks all chopped up. So, but again, I like it so much, I don't want to put it outside. I don't want to share with the bugs. All right, guys.
So the one I've got it's got the wood nesting blocks that are all, you can open up and take apart and stuff. So maybe this podcast will be the impetus to get me to actually put it out next year.
Well, I think so, but we're going to talk about, does it work or doesn't it? So I think we need to introduce our special guests for today. So we are joined by two, very legitimate looking podcasters right now. It's like you guys do this all the time. Brodie, Dunn, Timo, Wayman, thank you very much for joining us today to talk about bee hotels. And we have to address the elephant in the room. You guys look like you do podcasting for a living. Where are you right now?
Yeah, so we're in the University of Illinois main library. We had planned on just using my little bird recorder to do this, but this morning I opened up my bird recorder and the battery pack was entirely full of corrosion. So we didn't end up using that. Made an emergency little booking at this place, and so now we look like we're the hosts here.
I know. Well, it's very nice. Yeah, you're in like a very nice podcast recording studio. You have all of the sound absorbing material all around you. You have your pop filters on your mics. You guys look
There's
great.
All sorts of doodads in here that you can't even see.
Yeah,
like you're in the Millennium Falcon right now. There's all these buttons in front of you. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we're gonna go into hyperdrive any second.
Yes, I love it. Oh man, well, I guess before we dive into the questions, Brodie, you've been on the show before, but Timo, you brand new. Could you just give us a little bit about your background and why insects, why bugs, why?
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess I've been interested in insects since I was very little. I remember one of my first, furthest back memories that I have was my sister got stung by a yellow jacket at the playground when I was in pre-K. And then I just went under the playground and was looking up at the little paper wasp or whatever yellow jacket nest and just watching them walking around on it. And my parents are always good about whenever I expressed any sort of interest, they would always get me all sorts of books on a topic. So they got me insect identification guides and So it's like for as long as I remember, I've always been interested in insects, and specifically eusocial, like Hymenoptera, ants, bees, wasps have always been a big interest of mine. And yeah, it was something that I kind of wandered away from. And I went into undergrad having no idea what I wanted to do. And then when it came time to like try to find a lab to volunteer at, to get some research experience before applying to grad school, it was during the pandemic. So the only lab that I was able to join was a lab studying native bees, because I was able to just like get loaned a net and some like little binoculars and vials and microscope, and I was able to just do all that from home. So, and when I did it, I was like, oh, I love bees, and I've always loved bees, and it like kind of brought back a childhood, like a childlike wonder.
That's awesome.
So
is that
Timo,
is that where your research interests intersected with Brodie in the native bee study?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say so. That's definitely how we met, is through talking about native bees. But Timo, I absolutely love the fact that the origin of your love of insects has like this little tinge of sibling rivalry. I love that. That's a great origin story.
Yeah, I guess it's like with insects, it did start with me with morbid fascination of like fear of like, I'm scared that this thing's going to sting me. And then I feel like anything that you learn a lot about, it's hard to not fall in love with, I'd say.
Well, this brings up a lot of questions. And so you had mentioned the idea of social insects. We also got some solitary bees out there. But I mean, before we unwrap this present here, I think we need to kick off our line of questions. And so, Ken, would you mind getting us started, please?
All right. So we have some people listening who may not be familiar with bee hotels. So I guess, what are bee hotels and what's the point of them? How do they help? You know, why would we be putting out bee hotels in the first place?
Yeah. So a bee hotel is, usually it's this little box, and it's either got holes drilled through it, like roughly 1/4-inch holes drilled through it, or sometimes it's like kind of a box full of reeds. And inside of these cavities, whether it's a drilled cavity or the remnant from a pithy stem, native bees will nest. So, Timo, you want to tell us more about why native bees are using these?
Yeah, I mean, so there are a pretty large group of native bees that are cavity nesters in the wild that would be living in often like pre-existing holes drilled by beetles in rotting wood, is where like those tunnels is where they would be building their nests. And so bee hotels are supposed to sort of replicate and make more habitat for those. And specifically, like if you want those kinds of bees in your garden or on a farm, having a bee hotel where these like cavity nesting bees can move into will make those bees be living around there in your garden. So it initially came out of the idea of being able to study how these bees nested, and to study like what the populations of these were. And then people kind of started using it as a like conservation tool to try to like make habitat for them.
Because theoretically, like, in the woods and out in nature, trees will drop limbs, and these limbs will be inhabited by these beetles who have, drilled into it, and they're making their way in their own life. But in urban areas and in human-dominated environments, anytime a tree dies, we take the tree away, right? And so there's theoretically, right, these bee hotels are providing a space for those bees that doesn't really exist very often in this human-dominated environment that we've created.
Yep, very true. And like, fall arrives, all the perennials, annuals die. What is our first inclination? Well, at least some of us wipe everything away, get rid of all those dead stems and clean slate for the winter time and be ready for spring. But a lot of the reeds and the grasses and things that you described that can be in a bee hotel, well, that's that debris that we cleared out of there. So this is providing an alternative to that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And so a big thing too is that in general, native bees are in decline right now. And a big part of that is they are losing that habitat. So in theory, bees are supposed to be providing habitat for more types of bees to still have a place to be living in a landscape that has been so deforested and is so anthropogenically changed.
Yeah. And in all the research papers I've read about scientists looking at pollinator decline, specific species, or kind of broadly speaking, some of them will point to pesticides, some of them will point to disease, some will point to kind of the commercialized beekeeping industry. But every single paper, it seems like in every single conclusion I read, habitat loss is still the number one driver for the loss of native pollinators. So, yeah. I'm seeing lots of head shaking here and nodding, so I'm guessing I'm onto something.
Yeah. So I sometimes I already forgot we're on a podcast, right? So yeah, absolutely.
Audio medium.
Yeah, audio medium. But yeah, I mean, exactly. The habitat. We think a lot about climate change and all these other things, and the competition from honeybees. But if they had the habitat, right? If these native bees had habitat, all those other things would still be concerns, but the concerns would be way less.
All right. So I guess my next question about bee hotels then, this kind of goes in the vein of Peggy Doty. She's an educator at the extension up north. And one thing that I just carries around in my brain is when she says, the plants we put out, the bird feeders we put, all that stuff we put out this buffet of stuff, but we don't get to choose who uses it. So we put a bee hotel out. Is anybody else using this besides the bees? Is there any other inhabitants that would be in these bee hotels?
So often, it really depends on the location and factors that we don't always necessarily know. But often bee hotels are a majority inhabited by wasps. And I guess in a similar way to how the bees that are living in bee hotels are solitary bees, these are often solitary wasps. And I think that freaks people out, or it's like, how can we keep wasps from nesting in my bee hotel? I only want bees. These wasps, since they're solitary and they aren't trying to protect a nest, they're not out trying to sting you. And also they can often provide benefits of these wasps are carnivores, so they will often be eating things that might be pests in your garden. So yeah, often there are wasps that are living in bee hotels too, but that's a good thing.
And this is one of the things that Timo's project is kind of looking into is like, what exactly is in this? Because there are these wasps, right, that are inhabiting these bee hotels. But there's also, in these wasps, as Timo mentions, are definitely beneficial. But there could be these other things in them that aren't beneficial, and we don't totally understand them. So Timo, do you want to talk more about that?
Yeah, sure. So, on top of the inhabitants that are like bees and wasps that are just the native species that would be living in cavities in the wild, there's also concern because there are natural enemies of bees and wasps, like cuckoo bees or cuckoo wasps are bees and wasps that instead of laying their eggs in their own nest, will lay their eggs in the nest of another bee or wasp, and have their baby eat the food provisioned by the host. And that's a strategy called cleptoparasitism, or parasitism by stealing. It's kind of the same idea as a cuckoo bird.
Or cowbird, I think, is another one I'm familiar with in my neck of the woods. Yeah.
A brown-headed cowbird, yeah. The concern with bee hotels, one of them is that maybe in the wild, aggregations of bee nests, of these cavity nesting bees, would not necessarily be super close to each other, where a bee hotel often has just a ton of cavities all like an inch or less apart, where it would be very easy for something like a cuckoo wasp or a cuckoo bee to just come in and parasitize every nest if it wanted to. And in a similar vein, there are diseases of these cavity nesting bees like chalkbird that it's really easy for spores to just get into all of them because they're so close together. So there's definitely a concern of how these can host, can make it like, because in nature, obviously, it's good to have a natural level of parasites if a population is healthy. It's just part of the way of things. But there is concern that bee hotels could be a trap for like our native bees and native wasps are coming in and making nests in this what seems like a good spot.
Right.
And
It's like a one-stop shop theoretically, right? So we don't that this is something that we're afraid of, right? That this could be happening. And then this relates directly to Timo's project because that's what they're trying to look into. What is in these hotels other than the intended occupants, right? It's like, are there invasive because of this unnatural density? Because of this unnatural density, are there going to be more parasites? Are there going to be more diseases? Are there going to be more invasive species? Which, believe it or not, I did not realize this actually until relatively recently, which is very embarrassing. But there are kind of invasive bees, right? Can you tell us about the invasive bee that's out there?
I mean, there's like,
I guess it's not invasive, right? So we have to be careful. I think it's like an aggressive and non-native bee.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, we have introduced bees like Megachile sculpturalis, which they can be problematic. I've seen studies where when one of these bees is present in a bee hotel, the likelihood that native bees would also be in the bee hotel dropped off precipitously. The big problem with bee hotels right now is that there's so few data points. So that was one study in France, and we don't have other data. So it's like, is that going on here in our bee hotels in Illinois? We don't know. But there is precedent for these bee hotels if there's invasive bees, them being outcompeting native bees. In this study or in other studies with introduced bees, it's been found that our native bees had higher parasitism, like mortality, than the introduced bees in the same hotels. And invasive bees, I guess it might seem like, what's the problem? But invasive bees, I guess in the same way as our native bees are important because they're very tied in to our ecosystems at the base level of our bees and our plants co-evolved for thousands and thousands of years. So our native bees are really adapted to pollinating our native plants really well. Invasive bees are really good at pollinating invasive plants. So
those non-native plants.
Yeah, non-native plants. So there is concern with if we're losing all our bee diversity, that also is directly translating to our losing plant diversity. It's like it's a feedback loop.
And I have to cut in here to emphasize something that Timo said just a minute ago, which is how few data points we have, just how little science has been done. Because I started talking to Timo about this project about I guess probably a month ago. And I asked them, can you please send me just, a selection of the science, right? And they sent me, I don't know, probably 5 or 6 papers. And those are the 5 or 6 papers, right? Those are the ones, and so it was a quick read, but it's really unfortunate because there's so much interest in bee hotels, like Ken said, you've got one that you're waiting to put up, right? People are really interested in these things and they want to know, like, am I having a positive conservation impact? But they ask extension units, and not just Illinois extension, but like a lot of other extension places, and they don't know because there's so little science, right? So hopefully Timo's project can help address this dearth of information.
Yeah, and it's interesting with these, like, I feel like there's so much concern, and I feel like when you're reviewing like what's out there, I feel like I've read so many articles that are like, there are these concerns with bee hotels. Could they be a place where parasites are living? They be spreading disease? Maybe buy a bee hotel here. Or I feel like there's not enough information and not enough people are looking into it. And with my project specifically, I'm really curious about what's going on in these bee hotels in people's gardens, like the ones being set out by just people, because all of the studies I've seen too are of curated like bee hotels that were all made the same, are all like placed by scientists, like for specific stuff. And it's like, we don't necessarily know what's going on in just people's gardens.
And
if that's
people's
different
yards, right? They're exceptionally. It's sorry, guys. We're in the. I think this podcast space has gone to our heads. We've been talking over you guys for like, I don't know, probably 10 minutes. So sorry about that.
This is what this is for. Yes, we want you here to talk. So yeah, this is how it is supposed to be.
Right, but these papers, all what Timo is saying is like, there are these papers, but they are on these like aggressively controlled environments, right? Like, so every bee hotel is exactly the same, and they're all in like a I don't know, a 5 square miles, so they can control for this and that. And of course, controls are like absolutely necessary to do like really good science in particular situations, but it does kind of bias some of your findings that you get towards not a perfect census, right? Like, you're not seeing the environment as it's actually used. And of course, a lot of places it's fine, right? But in this particular instance, Timo thinks that there's a good chance that they're maybe missing something about the real world because of those controls that they put onto those experiments.
Yeah, I mean, something that I clocked in reviewing the literature is that a lot of these papers where they're finding a ton of invasive species are ones that are done in cities. And I guess I kind of have a concern that as much as it's a noble goal to be trying to increase bee diversity in cities, I guess I have a concern that with these bee hotels, it's just exacerbating the problem of making a breeding ground for these invasive bees instead of having bee diversity be increased in cities. So there's several landscape factors and factors about the gardens that bee hotels are in that we just don't know how they affect what's in the bee hotels, but I suspect that they have a pretty big effect. And I think a goal of my project is to kind of suss out, like, when are situations we should be using bee hotels? What are situations we shouldn't be using bee hotels? How can we like best place them, best everything to optimize them for conservation instead of having them be counterproductive. Because it's like there's some information out there, but it's backed by so little data points.
Yeah, I mean, pollinator conservation in cities is kind of in urban areas specifically, is kind of having a moment. And that's because it really does genuinely seem like it could be possible, right? Like, there are things that we could do. Maybe this is a conservation that we can do in the urban environment. So we can't conserve for bears, right? Like, we're not going to be able to conserve habitat for black bears, right? We can't do that in the middle of a densely densified urban environment. It's not going to happen. Bears need too much habitat, and there's too many conflicts with people. But with bees, they're so small. And, what are they eating? Well, they're not eating antelope or deer or whatever. They're eating pollen and nectar, and that's something that we can theoretically provide.
Yeah.
And the sort of hiccup here is potentially that these bee hotels are potentially putting these not necessarily the resources at risk, putting the bees at risk through what they're eating, but putting them at risk by where they're nesting, right? Because these nests, as Timo was talking about, are dense, like way more dense than you would typically expect in actual nature. So maybe there are these negative things that can happen because of that density of nesting sites, right? Or maybe it's because there's just a higher population of invasive insects in urban environments, because we know that's true, right? Like that there are I think that's true, isn't it?
Yeah. I've seen, yeah.
Can you verify that there's a higher range of invasive insects in urban environments? That's correct, right?
That wouldn't surprise me.
I'm pretty sure I've seen papers that came to that conclusion.
Yeah,
I think MacGyver.
Well, we'll say that's a true fact right now. We'll
say that's supported by the literature.
Yeah,
yes.
If it's wrong, we'll put it in the show notes, right?
Well, hold on there now. According to the Journal of Urban Ecology, it is difficult to make general statements about whether urban areas have a higher density of invasive insects. The density of invasive insects can vary depending upon the species of the insect, location, and all the environmental factors. The urban fabric is a diverse interweaving of all different types of environments. Well, I hope you do not mind my intrusion. And now back to the show.
I mean, and another thing with cities and the bees is that cities are often have so many ornamental plants, and ornamental plants will encourage invasive bees and invasive insects, where I am curious how the different factors might be interacting, where it's like, could we have higher diversity of native bees in urban bee hotels if we had native plants around the bee hotel? We just don't know right now.
So obviously we've talked a lot about bee hotels. So how exactly do bees or wasps utilize these hotels? And maybe we should call them pollinator hotels, since wasps are pollinators too. Maybe people will be more accepting of them. But how do they go about utilizing these? I mean, you think about them, they're building their nests and they're laying their eggs. How does all of that work?
So it's like often in these tubes, you'll have a solitary female bee or wasp, and she will lay eggs in little chambers. And with each egg, if she's a wasp, she'll put some meat, often wasps will put like a little spider or something for the larva to eat when it wakes up, or when it when it hatches.
Yeah.
And I guess in that bees are just herbivorous wasps. Instead, they evolved to put pollen in those nest chambers instead of meat. And different species of bees and wasps will separate the chambers in different ways. Like leafcutter bees will use like little pieces of leaves that they'll cut off with their big jaws. Mason bees will use mud. I think grass carrying wasps will use like blades of grass. And these, the separation of the chambers is supposed to help keep parasites out. Although now a lot of parasites have evolved. Like you'll have the sharp tail bee that can stab through those chambers, but it's supposed to kind of have like a little sealed environments for each egg and its provisions.
So there's bees parasitizing other bees, or wasps parasitizing other wasps and bees. That's When I learned about parasitic wasps, I'm so glad that I'm not an insect, because what they do sounds horrifying.
Awesome.
I'm very happy that I'm much larger than than like all the wasps. That brings me a great deal of solace. Yeah. Great deal of comfort.
Yes.
So then for these hotels, and maybe this is something you're going to look at with your research project, but is there kind of a recommendation as to where to put these if somebody was going to put them out? Or do we know that?
So there is some data, like you want it to be facing southeast, getting the morning sun, which will be like less harsh than afternoon sun, but it's like you want it to be warm but not too warm. And this recommendation is obviously for like northern hemisphere. And you want it to be above the flower line, like above vegetation, so that it's easy to get it in and out of. And you want it somewhere secure so it doesn't fall over. Other than that, there are some evidence that placing it in different places can change what's in it. But there's not, that's something that still data is needed on.
Yeah, we're still working with those 5 or 6 papers. So there's just not a lot out there, you know. And I've got to guess the vast majority of your guys' listeners have got to be in the northern hemisphere. I'm guessing that, right? Is that true?
We get a few hits from Australia every now and then. So
nice.
Yeah.
Excellent.
That's where the bees that's where they do parasitize you. Yeah. In Australia.
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, okay. So, Timo, you described the process that the female constructs these chamber nesting areas throughout the area she may have excavated or found a hollow stem. And I've seen carpenter bees in action on my parents' deck, and they really do create these different chambers. But how does the hatching then work? How does the guy in the back get out? He's got to go through all of the other chambers to get out. How does that work?
So, I mean, I guess basically as a female is laying her eggs, she'll go from the inside out as she's building the chambers. The first eggs she's laying are the females, which are bigger and more costly to develop than the males. So the females, are laid in the back and the males are laid in the front. The males will finish developing first and leave first, and then the females will leave. And since the eggs are all pretty much being laid at the same time, they're all finishing development at the same time. So they're all like leaving the nest at the same time. And if there's a bee that like died or didn't finish developing, they can get around it or push it out. So, but they kind of can go out since they're all kind of going out at the same time. It just functions, and they don't have to go back in. So it's just a one-time thing.
But that's still really neat. That control of females go first because they take a little bit longer, and then stagger that out. Yeah, you've chipped away another piece of my insect armor, my exoskeleton. So very cool. I love that. I love that idea. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think there's some, and this is not a bee that nests in a bee hotel, but there are some like the small carpenter bees. They'll even have, I think there's the females are like bigger females are laid first, and then there'll be a helper, like smaller female, and then the males, and where it's like it'll arrange, like the males will leave, and then they have like what they call a Cinderella daughter that will help the mom in getting the rest of them out and stuff.
Or Cinderella, yeah.
All right, this may be another one that there just may not be a whole lot of information on, but if someone, after listening to this, we've convinced them that they should buy a bee hotel, what should people be looking for? And is this something they could make themselves?
So, I mean, as far as making it yourself, it's easy to putting out like resources for bees. People will make bundles of twigs or pithy stems themselves, or they can like drill little holes into blocks of dead wood. I think, and if you're buying a bee hotel, I generally say you want to buy a wooden one. But I mean, the whole thing with my project is I'm not sure that I'm recommending people buy bee hotels. because we don't know if they're good or not. We don't know if they're helpful. It's just a thing that has been like widely taken up without a lot of data behind it. So, I mean, hopefully after my project, I'll have a better answer. Maybe I can come back on.
It depends.
Mm-hmm. Well, so Brodie, you are an extension specialist and working with Timo, again, trying to find that connection between Illinois Extension and the research that's going on with campus. So can you describe your involvement in Timo's research?
Well, Chris, I'm an outreach associate, maybe specialist one day.
Well, maybe specialist in my mind. That's yes.
I appreciate the vote of confidence. Mm-hmm. So the reason why why Timo came to Extension and why we're involved with this thing is because what Timo needs is real life examples of bee hotels that have a history that people have actually been using, right? So what better way to find the folks that have these bee hotels who are interested in native pollinator health than to come through Extension and specifically come through your guys' podcast. So that's why I'm here, right? But so what we're hoping to do is to put together a little community science project where we will work with master gardeners, master naturalists, and the public to try to find some of these bee hotels that are out there that I think it's at least 2 years old is how old they're supposed to be. And then Timo will do their experiment on these hotels. And Timo, if you would please, can you tell us about what exactly you're going to be doing to these bee hotels?
Yeah, so we're going to be taking them back to the lab and basically we're hoping to get them before the end of the winter because we want to take them back to the lab and basically see what emerges from them and see like what the species are, see like what disease, like if we're seeing evidence of disease, if we're seeing like too many invasive species, disproportionate numbers of parasites, like how diverse are different bee hotels. And we also will have collected like location data and data about the gardens that the bee hotels were in. And hopefully we can draw some correlations between parasite load and like number of invasive species and like what is in the bee hotels. So have some more data on how those things can be related.
And Timo and I have talked about this. And one of the things is, of course, that this is going to be a destructive experiment, correct? Mm-hmm. So unfortunately, if you donate the bee hotel, you're donating it to science, right? It's going to be gone. Mm-hmm. So like, what can we offer to folks who might be willing to donate their bee hotel? Well, what we can offer is Timo is going to keep track of these bee hotels and who donates them. Mm-hmm. And what they will do is they will find out what's coming out of your bee hotel, what's in it. Are there diseases? Are there invasive species? Or are the 20 most beautiful bees coming out of it in quick succession, right? Timo will keep track of that, and then you'll get a personalized report for what was in your bee hotel at the end of the experiment. Now, it might be the case that there's nothing in the bee hotel, right? So theoretically, the report could be thanks, right? And a picture of Timo's smiling face. But more than likely, these bee hotels are going to have something in them, right? Mm-hmm. And so you'll be able to find out what was in them.
And you'll also be the first to know about whatever recommendations we're going to have after this experiment of what we learned in general.
Right. And that's like selfishly like that. There's like, I would love to say like Timo's not here. Timo, we're doing it just for the goodness of science. Right. But that's not true. Right. We're also doing it because Extension is really interested in what these results might be. Right. Like, can we use this experiment to expand our knowledge and give some recommendations to the folks that we serve here in Illinois to about whether or not they should be putting these bee hotels out there, and if they should be, where they might be needing to put them.
Because there's like pollinator conservation programs where they like send you a sign to put in your yard if you have a bee hotel, so people call us and ask us, where can I find a bee hotel? Is it a good idea to use this? I don't see any bees coming out of it. I only have wasps or spiders, so what do we, and so, we do get a lot of questions about just the bee hotel in practicality.
Yeah, hopefully we can find an answer. Timo will be able to give us the answer then.
Yeah. I mean, that was my kind of the impetus of this whole project was I was working, doing outreach stuff in upstate New York. And I was people would ask me about like, are these bee hotels? I put out a bee hotel. Are bee hotels good? I was like, I don't know. It's like all of the papers I'm seeing are completely contradictory. Like some are like, we've had all this great diversity, and some are like, it's horrible. And it's hard to know what to say. So it's like, that's kind of what inspired me, is like people to find a better, at least have a little bit of a clearer answer.
And I do want to emphasize to the folks at home that like, don't go outside and rip down your bee hotel, right? The message that we're trying to send right now is not that bee hotels are bad. We don't know that yet. That's what Timo's hoping to solve. Right now, we just don't know. We don't have enough data.
Wait and see.
The world waits. Put Timo's email address in the show notes, and you will be inundated with so many people asking bee hotel questions. But I guess if they have bee hotels to donate to the cause, that's a good idea. I do have one question, and if it's a ridiculous question, you're welcome to say this is a ridiculous question. How do you test for diseases? Is this do you mash them all up and throw them in like a analyzer? Do you have a tricorder like in Star Trek that just does the bee sit down and say, I don't feel so good? So how do you figure out if a bee has a disease?
Well, I mean, this is, I'd say, something that I will probably be figuring out as I do the experiment. I have the vague idea that, I mean, you'll know something's wrong if it comes out deformed, or if the larva just dies, like it doesn't emerge. You'll know something's wrong. And I mean, to figure out specifically, it'll have to depend. But I'm thinking there's going to be DNA analysis involved of like if we're having fungal diseases, or I don't know. That's kind of a bridge I'll cross when I get to it. I think that isn't something that I've thought that far ahead about.
Having just emerged from graduate school, I can say that folks think that there's like way more of a plan than there really is. Sometimes you're going by the seat of your pants, and you're figuring it out as you go along, and you're learning what you need to know. As you find out that that's what you need to know, right? But a good sign that there's been a problem or a disease of some kind is that the bee is no longer a bee, right? That you open it up and there's no bee inside, or there was a bee inside, right? So that's definitely a place to start.
Okay. And I was kind of asking based upon previous conversation. Brodie, I looped you into that email chain of kind of a debate of property owners wanting to use honeybee hives in a native prairie, talked about the possibility of disease spread. And they asked me, well, how do you figure out if there's a sick native bee? Because I said, well, I guess monitor things, be very careful with this. And then they came back to me and said, well, how do I know if a bee is sick? And so I just wanted to ask the experts while you're sitting here. So thank you for humoring me.
They all disappear. Let's see, they're sick.
Yes. They're homesick.
We need that. We need to get that tricorder technology going. We really need that stuff.
I know. Yes. Well, until that arrives, we desperately need this research. We do need these answers. And so how can people reach out to this project? How can people find out more information if maybe they have a bee hotel or considering having one, would like to donate a bee hotel to the research study? As you have a web address to share with us?
Oh yeah, so we have a quick link for it. I think it's go.illinois.edu/bee hotel. I think that's the quick link for it. If not, what's going to happen is that my voice is going to cut out and it's going to be Chris's voice in saying the actual link, and that'll be in the show notes, I hope.
And there'll be text right here with the link. So
that is the correct short link.
Thank you, Ken. Thank you.
And then on that website, I have some more information on the things we talked about. And also there's a link to a survey where you can put your information if you do want to donate a bee hotel, so that we can reach out to you and hopefully use your bee hotel in our project.
Well, this is exciting. I'm excited. Aren't you guys excited? Like diving into this stuff, ripping these bee hotels apart like an angry bear, like, where's the honey, scientific discovery, I think, is amazing. So, and I see this directly benefiting people in Illinois who want to know if this is actually working.
Absolutely. And I'm so excited, at least. Timo has so much work that they have to do. So they're probably maybe a little less excited than we are. But, I'm just going to be sitting in my office. And then one day Timo's going to email me the results and it's going to be a blast. I'm so much looking forward to it.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I think so much of my master's degree right now has been so much literature review. I'm excited to get to what I came here for, is like looking at the little bees under the microscope and finding out what they are.
Yeah, the field work and looking at those bees under those microscopes. It's always fun.
But Timo, with the expectation that you're going to publish, so you're going to be working with a committee and everything through this, and this will be your, your master's research project. So do you have a timeline? I'm just curious, do you have a timeline when that published research is expected to be unveiled? And I know that's asking a lot, especially when you talk about research, but got a timeline in mind?
I mean, I guess it's like, it so depends on how many bee hotels we're able to get, how much is in them, how long the analysis will take. But I guess in the idea that I have to have this published before I graduate, hopefully in a year and a half, I'll have something to show for it. And I'm hoping to get at least all of the bees emerged by the end of the summer. So
we'll try to have some early results. It won't be recommendations, right? But Timo and I will talk to each other, and Timo will tell me what's going on with these bee hotels, what they're seeing as they're dissecting these and having them emerge. And we'll keep track of what we're seeing and say, like, well, this is what we're seeing in general over here, and this is what we're seeing in general over here, right? So we'll have some early results to give folks. They won't have to hold their breath for all that time.
Yeah, for the publication process, we'll have something. We'll have something for people early.
Well, that was a lot of great information about bee hotels. So listeners, viewers, make sure that you head to go.illinois.edu/beehotel, find out more, and to learn how, if you have a bee hotel, you can donate it to science. Well, the Good Growing Podcast is a production of University of Illinois Extension, edited this week by me, Chris Enroth. A special thank you, Brodie, Timo. Thank you both so much for finding the nicest studio that anyone has ever appeared on in this show before. So thank you so much for finding the nicest. You are by far and above. You look the part. So thank you.
Anything for you guys.
Thank you for having us. I appreciate the opportunity to get my project out there to all your listeners.
And a special thanks to Ken Johnson for hanging out with me, as always, every single week. Thanks, Ken.
Yes, thank you, Chris. Thank you, Brodie and Timo. Look forward to seeing what comes of this. And I think we should have done this in the beginning, Chris, but we should give a shout out to the people that stopped us at the conference last week and said hi.
We should.
It was nice to meet all of you at the From Food to Flowers Everything local conference. So.
Yep.
We know you exist. It's not just a bunch of bots listening to us.
Yep. Nope. No, not just bots and my mother listening to us. But so, yes, thank you, everyone, for stopping us and saying hi at the conference last week.
And let's do this again next week.
Oh, we shall do this again next week. Are you sick and tired of being stuck inside with your children like me? Well, we are going to have horticulture educator Brittany Haig come on, talk about winter activities you can do with your kids. Because yes, it has been cold. Yes, it hurts when you breathe outside. So we'll see if maybe there's some horticulture related activities we can keep ourselves busy with as we are as we batten down the hatches, so to speak, here in winter. Well, listeners, thank you for doing what you do best, and that is listening. Or if you're watching us on YouTube, watching, and as always, keep on growing.